Welcome to Tell Me a Story, the Christmas edition. I told Beth a while ago it is so much fun to have somebody else to act like an idiot with. So we have found that acting like idiots is really fun, and if you haven't been brave enough to try it, you really ought to. So and we're glad to see you here. Can you believe this is the 7th month that we've done this? It seems like we just started. We started in June, and so this is our 7th time, so that means that you'll hear the 35th person today do this, number 31, 32, 33, 34, and 35. And for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure you've noticed that we're recording these, and each of the participants are receiving a recording of the DVD, and at some point we'll probably show them on the Springmore in-house television. So that if you've missed some of them, maybe you'll be able to catch them later on. But this has just been so exciting for us. We do need to remind you that we still need people on our list. We only have one person signed up for January, and so the continuation of this totally depends on you. So if you have a story, let me know, let Beth know, write us a little note, give us a phone call. If you catch me in the hallway, I might forget it, so I need to be able to where I can write it down at least. But we hope that you'll consider telling a story. So without further ado, we will greet our first storyteller today, and that is Bill Williams. Bill moved to Springmore with his wife Jenny in April 2005, and she has since passed away, and he lives in House 47. His daughter's here today with him.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't want you to think that the title that was announced is misleading. I will get to that occasion, but I want to talk first about a Sunday school class at First Presbyterian Church. It's called the Koinonia class. I have been involved actively in 4 Presbyterian churches in 4 different states in my lifetime. And I've visited a lot of other denominations, but I've never encountered a group quite like the Koinonia class at First Presbyterian Church. It was formed at the end of World War II by returning servicemen and women from all branches of service, so excited to get back to their own lives and take up where they had left off. They formed this class. It was they were in their second decade when my family joined. And by then it had already been named the Koinonia class by the then one of the ministers at First Presbyterian Church. He and his wife continued for the rest of their active lives involved in the class. At one point, it was not unusual to find 70 or 80 members present. So obviously it was not your discussion type group. It was much more like it was really more like Vespers here on Sunday night. The format was much the same also. We started with some prelude music playing, which was the signal to stop talking, stop drinking coffee, and take your seats. Then it was followed, much like here, by an opening prayer and a hymn and some announcements. Our announcements included a report on, it was similar to the wellness reports here. It covered not only the status of ill members, it also covered birthdays and anniversaries that would be coming up during that week. It was pretty all-inclusive. Then we did something that I don't think we have ever seen or want to see comparable to Vespers at Springmore. We took up a collection. There were multiple teachers. It was not a repetitious sort of a thing. And in due course, I ultimately became one of the rotational teachers. Every year, there were social activities. The members of this class did not just get together on Sunday morning. They were family friends. They traveled together. They took vacations together. Some really exotic vacations. I recall one year, one couple in the class was interested in some kind of a Pan-American exhibit going on in New Orleans. And they got enough people together that wanted to go that they chartered a bus, and off we went. It was not unusual to do the same thing to go to New York. Perhaps one of the most adventuresome times was another member of the class learned of a organization called Untours out of up eastern Pennsylvania area, and that resulted in 8 couples, 16 people, spending a month in Switzerland without ever being in a hotel or having to eat in a restaurant. The contractor had arranged for individual cottages or apartments in very small towns in Switzerland on the railroad and bus lines. And once there, they had a meeting, showed us how to use everything, and then quietly disappeared, and we were on our own. Fantastic month we spent there. The associate minister, now long retired, and his wife, whom you will hear from eventually, were 2 of the people that went along on that trip. Because they did not leave, they too became part of the group. I want to talk about the minister's wife now. She was a very small in stature, but very, very large in faith and personality. She was soft-spoken. She was always there. She was always helpful and supportive and involved, but she didn't make a lot of waves. Her role primarily, besides just being a member, was to be the pianist. Sort of like Beulah here. She started calming us down from conversation in the coffee pot with a prelude. We would get to our seats, and then we'd have the format that you're so used to here if you attend the Vespers. She played the piano as well. Faye played the music for our singing. We would have 1 or 2, sometimes 3 hymns. But when it was time for the lesson to begin, that is when Faye would quietly, unobtrusively leave the piano bench and slide into one of the front row seats. She was always sitting there quietly, paying attention. Whatever the lesson, whomever was delivering the lesson. Until the one day that caught me by surprise. I was also one of the rotational teachers, and that particular Sunday, it had been my time to teach. I had taken an approach on the lesson, and I can't even recall now which scripture verses were involved, but I had taken the approach that this was an opportune time to compare the world in which we live in today and the world that we study all the time from the Bible. There were substantial differences. Our world, they would have thought, would have been much, much bigger than theirs, when in fact it had become smaller. If you stop and think about it, we think nothing of taking off from this place, even Raleigh, going on a trip somewhere. My daughter is with me this morning. She and her quilting friends.
Bill,
Yes.
watch your time.
Oh,
We're getting a little bit long.
Okay. Think nothing of spending the day driving to the other side of Charlotte to buy some fabric for their quilting. On that particular Sunday, I compared that lifestyle with the biblical times when the people, they got where they went to by walking, maybe lucky enough to ride on a beast of burden. And I was had gotten to this point when all of a sudden Faye McInnes, the pianist, the preacher's wife, interrupted me in a voice I'd never heard. "Oh, Bill, you forgot. You don't remember the Pontius the Pilate and Mary and Joseph's flight to Egypt?"
Pontius the Pilate. That's good. Very good. Clancy Hofer's next. Clancy has a story to tell us. He's been here since February 2003, and he lives in East Apartments. He's going to tell us a story, Pontius the Pilate.
I don't think I can top that.
That's good.
When I had to work for a living, I was a salesman, and I sold paint. I didn't sell ordinary house paint. I sold paint to companies who built the product and painted it. And the particular company that I am talking about was in Broken Bow, Oklahoma. I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you couldn't get to Broken Bow from Tulsa. You had to go to Salisaw first, and in going from Salisaw, you had to go through Poto, who, by the way, claimed to have the biggest hill in the world. And A hill is defined by being 2,000 feet or less. After that, it's a mountain. But by the English claimed that they had a hill that was 1 centimeter below 2,000 feet. So they lost the distinction of having the tallest hill in the world. Anyway, this particular account was a very large user of paint. And they, by the way, were 7 miles outside of Broken Bow, Oklahoma. They used paint in very, very large quantities. In fact, they bought all their paint in 4,000-gallon tankers. And they used 1 gallon of paint a minute, 24 hours a day, and 7 days a week. So they were large users. I was not their only supplier. They had a gentleman working for them who, by some good fortune, was not a decision maker as to who the supplier would be. He was in charge of quality control, and he ran tests on the product as it was being used to make sure that it met all specifications. The first time I went to see him and went to his office and started talking to him, he started whistling. He was going while I was talking, and I figured, gosh, he doesn't know what I'm talking about. He's off on cloud 9 somewhere. But later on I found out that he knew what I was talking about. He was a different kind of person, for sure. One day I was talking to him and he said, you know, your competitor gives me golf balls all the time. I said, he does? He says, yes, he brings me a dozen golf balls every once in a while. And I said, well, gee, I don't know about that. And so I went home back to Tulsa. The next day went to the driving range and told them that I wanted 2 dozen of the worst balls that they throw away. And they gave them to me that didn't have any jackets on them or anything. Took them in a brown paper bag. And the next time I went to see him, I said, met your competitor out in the parking lot. And he knew that there really wasn't any need for him to come in here if I came first, because I was going to get the order. But he did want me to give you these. And fortunately, he took it as a good joke. Another time I was in his office and he got a phone call. He said, hello, Mama? You sure, Mama? Okay, you don't want me to play for you. You sure you don't? Okay, Mama. And he hung up and he said, I suppose you wonder what that's all about. And I shook my head, yes. And he said, well, he said, oh, and I forgot to tell you, he played the guitar. And he was a Methodist. He said, a friend of mine got married and he was from a different church than my parents were in. My parents were Baptists. And they asked me to play for this friend's wedding, and I did. And I was told that I shouldn't have done so. And a little bit later, he had been a Baptist, by the way. And he said a little later, I played for someone else again in a different church. And he said, this time, they voted me out of the church. He says, my daddy voted against me. So that's the reason that he was trying to get he was playing with his mother and tried to get her to see if he might not play for a wedding that she was talking about. One other time I was at his desk, and by the way, he worked during the lunch hour. I would leave Tulsa real early in the morning, get to Broken Bow about 10, work till 12, take some of the people to lunch. And he couldn't because he had to work through the lunch hour. And he told me one day, he said, you know, Mulford, you never take me to lunch. And I said, well, we'll have to correct that. So the next time I took a group to lunch in Broken Bow, I ordered a hamburger ahead of time. When we finished eating, I took your hamburger, unwrapped it, took a bite out of it, and when I got back to him, I handed him the hamburger and said, Charles, don't tell me we didn't ever have lunch together.
Awesome.
Awesome. Don't you love this? I just want to put in another little plug that everybody out there must have 8 minutes to tell us, to make us laugh and enjoy your life too. So talk to Phyllis, talk to Beth, let us hear. Now you're going to hear a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story from John Harris. His wife Grace is here. He's lived here since 1994. Come on up. You're going to love this. Let's see where we want this, John. Let's see how you want it.
Those of you that read the newspaper article about me in Sunday's paper have already heard or read what you're going to hear, but I'll try to add a little bit to it. My story starts January the 8th, 1914. They say that was the date I was born. And I say they say because I don't have a birth certificate. And Aunt Mary brought us into the world, me and my 4 brothers and 2 sisters. And I looked it up, and if I was born in 1914, next month I'm going to be 99 years old. There's no way I can be 99 years old. Anyway, when I was 4 years old, I went into business. I was looking out the window one day, and a neighbor was hauling logs to a sawmill right through our yard and pasture, because we had no public road. We lived way back in the woods of Chatham County. That gave me an idea. I sat there in the window, and the next time, well, what he had to do, he stopped his horses and wagon, got off, opened the gate, got back on, drove them through, got back off, on the wagon. I said, you know, if I opened that gate for him, I bet he'd give me some money. So I watched for him, and the next time I saw him coming, I ran out there, gave him and opened the gate, and he gave me a penny. Well, I was real business. I watched him for several days coming back and forth, and soon I had 25 cents. And I thought I was the richest person in the family. Grace says I've still got that 25 cents. Then it was time to go to school when I grew up. And I walked 2.5 miles to the little 2-room schoolhouse. And it had 2 rooms and 2 wood-burning stoves. And the first one there had to build a fire. But I was never the first one. And then for water, we got about a 3-gallon tin bucket and walked down to a spring, which was just below the school, and brought it back up and set it at the front of the room. And we had a dipper with a handle on it, and everybody used the same dipper the whole time. Then I want to tell you about the school teachers. I started to say they boarded at our house, but that's not the right word. They lived at our house. They took the meals with us. They had a room to sleep in. They sat around the fire at night and talked to us. They went to the same back house that we had to in the yard. And they were often playing tricks on us, which is a lot of fun. One day going to school, my brother and I got behind the teachers where they couldn't see us, and we picked some cockleburrs off of a weed. And it looked like some of you don't know what a cocklebur is, but it's a little thorny thing about the size of marble that's as sharp as a razor. We put in their biscuits when they were out of recess. And we peeped in the window at lunchtime to see what would happen. And one of them bit down on that biscuit and she screamed. And she opened that biscuit. They started laughing. They took the cookaburras out and ate the ham biscuits. They thought it was a lot of fun, fortunately. Then when I finished that little school, I wanted to go to high school. But that was 5 miles away, and a horse and buggy was the only way to get there. But fortunately, my older sister got married soon after that and moved to Bondley, where they had a high school. And I immediately went over there and begged for a room, and they took me in. So I stayed with them for 4 years in high school. Then when high school was over, something told me, John, you ought to go to college. There's no way to go to college. I had no money, middle of the Depression. But I borrowed $300 from an uncle and caught a ride to Raleigh. I went to the dean's office to register. I said, can I register for $300? He said, young man, you sure can. That's more money than I've got. The banks had closed the day before. So everybody was in about the same shape. And I knew a family that moved to Raleigh that used to live close to us. And I went to see them to see if I could get a room. Well, they didn't have a room, but they got a cot and put it in the basement. And I went down in the basement to sleep. Now that wasn't as bad as it sounds because it's right next to the furnace. It's very warm and I just had a good time. Eating my meals with them and doing work in the yard to help pay for it. And I never spent any money for a room while I was in the 4 years. I lived in different homes. One of them was a real nice home, young couple that had a baby, and they like to go out at night, and they gave me a room to babysit with the baby, and I enjoyed that one very much. Well, when I finished, to begin with, I was studying agriculture to be an ag teacher. And I was working for 10 cents an hour for people in people's yard. And I said, you know, if I knew more about what I was doing, I could charge more. So I switched over to horticulture. And I went up to 25 cents. But that's not as bad as it sounds, because I could go across the street and get a good meal for 25 cents. Then one day I was digging a hole for a lady to plant a tree. Ground was frozen and I was freezing. Something told me, John, you can make more money with a pencil than you can with a shovel. So I switched my major to landscape architecture. And I want to tell you about the first job I did. I was still a student. But I noticed a house being built. And I went to them and asked them if they needed some help in the yard to landscape it. And they said, yeah, we sure do. So I drew them a landscape plan and put a good price on it, and they were delighted and paid me. Then they said, well, John, who can we get to do this work? And I was just dying to do it. I said, well, look around. If you can't find anybody, I reckon I could do it. They said, where can we get the plants? I said, well, go to some nurseries around here and see what you can find. And I was just dying to get the plants too. And they couldn't find anything. And I said, well, I guess I could give them. So I knew a nurseman, and I called him up, and he delivered the plants. And I charged them retail price, and he gave me wholesale price. So I made money off of them in 4 ways. But they were tickled to death, and I was tickled to death too. I don't know how much more time I got. Tell you maybe one more story. After I finished at state, I went to Greensboro to be superintendent of city parks. And I was there a couple of years. And one day I went to the mayor and I said, we need to take some trees out of this park. The tree's about to die, soil erosion. He said, young man, if you touch one of those trees, you'll get fired, and I will too. We've been trying to do something with that park for years. Well, soon after that, they asked me to talk at the garden club. But I got through, I said, by the way, if we don't do something, we're going to lose a lot of trees in this park. Some of them are getting in bad shape. We need to take some of these trees out and get grass. And I waited a minute, and the chairman said, well, let's do it. I went to the mayor and I told him, we're ready to take some trees out. He said, young man, you need a raise. I think my time is up.
John, thank you. So you went from 1 cent an hour to something higher than that later on, didn't you? Can you tell he was in broadcasting for a number of years? Yeah. Thank you, John. Well, we have stories from women today as well. And our next storyteller is Barbara Volk. You know, we all have places in our lives, in our past or maybe present even, that are very special to us. And Barbara's going to tell us about a special place.
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1930. I think that many of us in this room lived through difficult times during the 30s, right? One bright spot in my life was my grandparents' home in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Grandpa was a dentist, and the home was very special to me. One of the reasons that it was so important to me was that our family moved so often as my father was changing jobs. During that time, every Sunday was the day to visit Grandma and Grandpa. I'm going to take you through the house. When you entered the front door of the house, you saw the little built-in bench that was in a small entry with a closet. That was where we sat to remove our snow-covered galoshes. The next room was a large entry hall with the French doors leading to the dining room, then the breakfast room, and the large kitchen on the right. On the left were the French doors leading into the living room and the music room. My grandpa played the violin, and my mother accompanied him on the piano. When I was quite small, somebody gave me a little alligator. I managed to lose it, and we finally found it under the radiator in the music room, all dead and dried out. There was a laundry chute that went from the top of the house to the bottom, and my friends and I had a great time sending messages from up to down. There was also a milk box that opened to the outside that allowed the milkman to put our order in it, and then we could open the box from the inside to remove it. Anybody ever had that, one of those in their house? Yeah, it's a couple. I remember one time when I was very small and I could climb through the box and open the door for my parents when they had forgotten their key. The full attic was a great place to try on Aunt Kay's dancing dresses and to practice dancing where nobody could see me. I never dreamed that in 1985, Aunt Kay would move to Springmoor and marry Emerson Stanford, a true Southern gentleman, within 6 months of her arrival. Theirs was one of Springmoor's first weddings, and they had a very happy marriage until his death 5 years later. The basement of the house was a spot for crocks of sauerkraut mellowing and dark corners full of mysterious somethings. The jars of dill pickles were special treats. Do any of you remember the coal bin in your basement? Not so many. Yeah, okay. I remember Grandma sitting on a step in the breakfast room, hand beating the egg whites for her famous angel food cakes. As Christmas approached, the living room doors were closed, and on Christmas Eve, we sat on the window seat in the dining room waiting for Santa to arrive. The house across the street had a fountain with soft blue lights. In the winter, the lights illuminated the snow, so it was a pleasant view to watch while waiting for the sleigh to arrive. Finally, we heard the tinkling of the bell that meant Santa had arrived, and we were allowed to enter the living room where the beautiful tree and gifts waited for us. I finally realized years later that we were really waiting for Uncle Adolph and his gifts to arrive. We opened our gifts on Christmas Eve and returned to our home in Waukesha, where we opened our father's family gifts on Christmas morning. When I was about 5, I needed to have my tonsils removed, and there must have been a shortage of funds to pay a hospital bill. Our family doctor was Uncle Louie. The problem was solved by moving the breakfast room table at Grandma and Grandpa's house so that it was under the lights in the breakfast room. I remember the smell of ether. No pain until afterwards, and then ice cream helped with that. There were no after effects of this strange and probably illegal surgery. However, every time my doctor looks down my throat, he says, "Why don't you have an epiglottis?" And then I get to tell my story all over again.
Barbara, thank you for taking us back with you. Barbara, I failed to mention that she and her husband Dick live in East Apartments, and they have been at Springmoor since June of 2006. Our concluding story today is brought to us by Barb Hunsley. She was one of our first storytellers, I believe. She and Art live in South Village, and they have been here almost 2 years now, I believe. Barb's going to tell us about Christmas. Barb?
Everyone, clergy or not, views Christmas as a very special time of year. For those of us in the church, Christmas is an exceptionally busy time, what with extra sermons to be written, additional home visits to be made, seeing to those who find that the holiday season is rather a depressing time rather than one of celebration and joy. Sometimes the season just gets away from us and we forget what it's about. Yes, ministers and their family are just as guilty as the rest of the world. It was around 1964 when my husband and I found ourselves serving a church as its associate clergy family. At that point in our lives, it was the two of us with 2 daughters, ages 4 and 1. We loved our new home and the wonderful church who had welcomed us. We lived 2 doors from the church, with the senior pastor and his family living between the church and our house. Because of the proximity of the homes, we pretty well knew what the other was all about. The senior pastor's family consisted of him, his wife, and their daughter and son, both somewhat older than our 2 girls. I decided that because neither of the 2 families could get away for the holidays, as did many of our church members, I would invite the senior pastor and his family to celebrate Christmas afternoon with us and have a big turkey and dressing dinner. This, of course, would occur after both families had opened all their gifts and enjoyed this very precious family time together. With the invitation extended and accepted, the gathering was planned for 3 o'clock the afternoon of the 25th of December. By Christmas morning, all the angel wings were memories, all the shepherd robes were put away for another year. The Christmas tree was starting to lose its glitter. The last Christmas carol was sung and shelved. Christmas wasn't over. It was just put on pause while we enjoyed our new toys, modeled our new clothes, skimmed through our new books, and figured out our new games. I headed for the kitchen to start getting ready for the big meal. As 3 o'clock came closer, our girls became more excited about the arrival of our next-door neighbors. Since they lived so close, the girls found that they could stand at our front window and watch for them to leave their house and walk the few steps to our front door. The senior pastor's name was Charles, but our younger daughter had great difficulty in pronouncing his name, and it came out Uncle Gooker for Uncle Charles. The family had taken over the new name, and all of us used it outside of church events. Unfortunately, it was a name that would stick for years to come. Finally, they arrived, full of great cheer for the day and for the knowledge that the holidays were almost over. As much as Christmas was loved, enough was enough. The meal was exceptional, if I do say so myself. The turkey was brown and moist. The dressing was just the right consistency. The beans were a hit with everyone, and I even remembered the cranberry sauce. All of a sudden, the girls were yelling that it was time for the birthday party. Our guests sat up abruptly, with questions spread across their face. What birthday party? They didn't know there was going to be a birthday party, and they had come empty-handed, no gifts. What would we think? It took only a second for Uncle Gooker to quickly gather himself to his senior pastor height and ask, "Birthday party? I didn't know we were celebrating a birthday today. Whose birthday is it?" Without hesitation, our 4-year-old daughter rose from her chair and sang, Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, baby Jesus. Happy birthday to you. The embarrassed silence in the room could have been cut with the birthday cake knife. Merry Christmas.
We've had some surprises in these stories, haven't we? Barb, thank you. I can see that 4-year-old singing happy birthday. This concludes our storytelling for today. As you know, as Phyllis said earlier, we depend upon you to let us know what story that you would like to share, and perhaps some of these memories of these folks has triggered something for you. You see, some people use no notes, some people write out entirely what they want to say. It's up to you. Only you have the stories. We're here to help you get them out, okay? Thank you.